Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to MOS Live Virtual Planetarium. My name is Christina. I'll be serving as your moderator today. And although you can see my face now, you'll mostly be hearing my voice in the background as I share your comments and your questions with our educator today. Our educator will be leading us on a tour of the sky tonight. And if you would like to answer their educator's questions or ask any questions of your own, you'll be able to do so by using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you do need captions today, you can also get those by selecting Show Captions on the closed caption button on Zoom. If you happen to be watching on Facebook or YouTube today, unfortunately, we cannot see your comments, but we're so happy to have you join us today. And don't forget to include your name and age if you would like a shout out when you participate. But with all of that being said, I would like to invite our educator to turn on their camera, introduce themselves, and get us started.
Hi, everybody. My name is Talia. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm going to be showing you a few things that you're going to be able to see up in the sky tonight. And if you're in the Boston area, this does not look like it's going to be a great night for sky gazing, but don't worry, you're going to be able to see this stuff that I'm going to talk about for more than just tonight. It'll be for the next couple of weeks. And to do that, I'm going to use a program called Stellarium, which is free and open source. So if you like it, you can, like what you see here, you can go download it yourself. So I'm going to share my screen. What we are looking at here is the sky, the way it would look from the Boston area at about 8 o'clock tonight. So this is also roughly the same as it's going to look 8 o'clock tomorrow night, the night after. Of course, if you're actually in Boston, you're not going to see nearly as many stars as this. One of the problems with living near the city is you can't see nearly as many stars. I always like to start facing the north, because some of our most familiar patterns are visible in the north. And if you've watched this show before, you can probably guess which pattern I'm going to start with. It is this very familiar one, nice and low in the northwest, which we commonly call the Big Dipper. 1, 2, 3 stars in the handle, 1, 2, 3, 4 stars in the bowl of the Big Dipper. Now, Big Dipper, you may or may not know, is not a constellation. It's actually a piece of a larger constellation. And I'll go ahead and put the lines for that constellation up there. You can see it's not quite fully above the horizon. The very bottom of it is just hitting the horizon. But here's the constellation. If you happen to know what this is supposed to be, go ahead and put that in the Q&A. If you don't know, but you'd like to guess what you think this is supposed to be, go ahead and put that guess in the Q&A. You may also always feel free to put a question mark.
All right, we have a few thoughts coming in, Talia, and it looks like we have votes for Great Bear, the Great Bear, Bear by Sylvie age 10. Lots of variations of a bear.
Yes, and I'm going to go ahead and say that means that you all already knew this was a bear, because if you did not know this was a bear, I don't see how you would guess it was a bear. This doesn't look like a bear at all. And one of the reasons it doesn't look like a bear is because there's something a little funny looking about this bear. It has an absurdly long tail. The handle of the Dipper is actually the bear's tail. Now, bears I've seen on Earth, they don't have tails that you could wag like a dog. They have little stubby tails, little cotton ball tails. But the story behind this bear is that it didn't start out in the sky. It did start out on Earth, and it got thrown into the sky by its tail. And in the process, its tail got all stretched out, because we all know that's what happens when you pull hard enough on a bear's tail. It's not. Please don't try that at home. And so the easiest part of the Big Dipper to find, or the bear to find, the Great Bear, Ursa Major, the official name, Ursa Major, the Great Bear to find, is the Big Dipper. They are the 7 brightest stars in the constellation. And from here in Boston, they are what we call circumpolar. They are always above the horizon. They don't actually set. There's a nice big piece of the northern sky that doesn't ever go below the horizon, because Boston is in the northern hemisphere. And of course, if you've seen this show before, if you know this is the bear, there's a chance that you already know that there is a second bear in the sky, Ursa Minor, a little bear. You can use the Big Dipper to find it. The two stars at the front of the Big Dipper are nice and handy. They'll point you in the right direction. We call them the pointer stars. You draw the line in between them and you follow that line out into space, and they point you to this star right here, which has a few interesting things going on. First of all, it is Polaris, the North Star. You can see it's almost directly over the letter N. You will also note that this is not the brightest star in the sky. For instance, the bright star Capella over here is much, much brighter than Polaris is. I don't know why Polaris has a reputation as a bright star. When you make a list of the brightest stars in the sky, Polaris doesn't hit that list until around number 50. It's actually just famous because it's in an interesting spot. It's right over the North Pole, and that means that as Earth spins, all these other stars appear to move in the sky, but since Polaris is directly over the pole, it's the only one that doesn't appear to move. It's the only one that stays in the same spot. And so that is why that's actually a famous star. It's also the end of the handle of the Little Dipper, which is much fainter than the Big Dipper. But the way to remember is that the two dippers actually, the bowls of the dippers actually are sort of pouring into each other. So you've got the handle here, 1, 2, 3 stars in the handle. And then 1, 2, 3, 4 stars in the bowl. Go ahead and put those lines up there so you can see the bowls of the dipper are sort of pouring into each other. Unlike the Big Dipper, the Little Dipper is a constellation, but its constellation name is not Little Dipper. Its constellation name is Ursa Minor, the Little Bear, which has an even longer tail than the Great Bear does. Now, while the Big Dipper is circumpolar, so it is always above the horizon, you can see that it's getting very low. This is the time of year where if you're going out and observing in the early evening shortly after sunset, the Big Dipper is at its lowest, which usually means it's the hardest to spot. This is the time of year when the Big Dipper is hardest to spot. Odds are you don't have a totally clear northern horizon. You've probably got hills or buildings or trees, which can make it very hard to find the Big Dipper. Fortunately, it is not the only circumpolar constellation, and there is another one that rises, gets nice and high in the sky just as the Big Dipper is getting low, which you can also use as a direction finder if you're trying to find Polaris, the North Star. And the constellation I'm talking about, right now it looks like a number 3 over here. At various times, depending on its orientation in the sky, it's an M, it's a W, it's an E. Right now, it's a number 3. So it's this constellation right here. I usually call it a W, but like I said, it depends what orientation it's in. This is one that, well, the bear at least vaguely looked like an animal. This one really doesn't look anything like what it's supposed to be. Now, if you were trying to name this constellation, what would you name that shape? Go ahead and put your answer in the Q&A.
All right, we've got a couple of thoughts coming in, Talia. Someone said they would call it the W. We've got another vote for the W, maybe W for whatever. And I think we have someone who knows what it is because they said they would call the constellation Cassiopeia.
Yep, that's a ringer in the audience for sure, because Cassiopeia is what this constellation is named. Cassiopeia was a queen in Greek mythology. So most of these constellations we talk about here today, they are Greek and Roman in origin because that's the set that are considered the official constellations. The Greeks and Romans were definitely not the only ones who did this. There are actually thousands of sets of constellations out there from different groups of people from all over the world. And that's part of the reason that back in the day, they decided they really needed one official set of constellations. And at the time, everybody was on a really big Greek and Roman kick. So they're the ones that got picked as the official ones. So the Greek and Roman name for this constellation is Cassiopeia, the Queen. And like I said, this looks nothing like a queen. She's supposed to be on her throne. There's no good way to turn that W into a queen on a throne. So the artwork here is does not match the shape very well because there's really not a great way to do it. And she is almost directly opposite the Big Dipper. are opposite Polaris from the Big Dipper. So Polaris is almost directly between the two, which is sort of how I can figure out where Polaris is in the sky. If the Big Dipper is too low for me to see, I just sort of look in the direction that the central point of the W in Cassiopeia is pointing. It doesn't point directly at Polaris, but it points at the Little Dipper. And it points very close to Polaris. So that is how I find Polaris in the sky when the Big Dipper itself is too small. Now, Cassiopeia, there's a whole story that goes with Cassiopeia, and it's one that got very famously told in the film Clash of the Titans. Both versions of it are based on the story of Cassiopeia and her family. So the story is that Cassiopeia was a queen. Of course, she also had a husband who was the king, and he is right next to her in the sky. He's kind of hard to see though. And he's another one that doesn't look anything like what it's supposed to be. The way I always find him is if I imagine the arms of the W are the arms of the queen. They are opening up to give her husband a hug. So the arms are opening in this direction. This group of stars right in here marks the king, Cepheus. So his name is Cepheus. And he kind of looks like a house, a crooked house. So there's sort of a square right here and then a peak right here. That is in fact supposed to be the constellation known as the king, Cepheus, the king. Again, it doesn't look anything like a king on a throne. But that is Cassiopeia's husband. So again, I always remember at least what direction he's in by remembering that she's sort of got her arms open like she's about to give him a hug. He is a tricky constellation to find though. If you go hunting for that one and don't find it, I don't feel so bad about it. So Cassiopeia was a very, very vain woman, according to the story. And she bragged that she was as beautiful as the sea nymphs. And Poseidon, who was the god of the sea, was very, very proud of his sea nymphs and did not like Cassiopeia comparing herself to them. So he sent a sea monster to ravage the coast of Cepheus and Cassiopeia's kingdom and said that he would only stop the sea monster if they sacrificed their daughter Andromeda to the sea monster. So they were very, very sad about this, but they needed to stop the sea monster. So they were totally prepared to sacrifice their daughter, the princess Andromeda. Fortunately for her, the hero Perseus came by on his winged horse Pegasus, and he had just come from slaying the Gorgon Medusa. Medusa, who was so hideous that one glance of her eyes would turn you to stone. And he just showed the severed head of Medusa to the sea monster. The sea monster turned to stone. He rescued the Princess Andromeda. Everybody lives happily ever after. And almost all of these characters are in the sky. In fact, most of that story, all of those characters got immortalized in the stars. So the easiest to find of the ones that are left is actually the winged horse Pegasus. So Pegasus is marked in the sky by a kind of distinctly square shape. So right here, it's rising in the east right now. You can see there's the east. We're looking towards the eastern sky. And when you see this in the sky, it actually is very close to a perfect square in the sky, which is why the eye tends to be drawn to it, which actually makes it relatively easy to find. So this square is sometimes called the autumn square because it does return to the sky in the early autumn, but mostly known as the Great Square of Pegasus because it is Pegasus's body. Pegasus, the flying horse, half of him is in the sky, only half. Fortunately for us, it's the front half. So the square marks Pegasus's body. Coming off of this corner here, there is a neck and a head. And then coming off of this corner here are the two front legs. So this is supposed to be a vaguely upside down half a flying horse. I'm not sure that's what I would have gone with, What would you have named this constellation if it was up to you to give it a name? Would you have gone with upside down half a flying horse, or would you have named it something else?
I do think that that name sounds fun just because it's so specific and long, Thalia. But we've got a couple of other thoughts coming in from our viewers. One person thought they could call it the broken chair. Someone else thought maybe just call it horse. You don't need all the other descriptors. Maybe the upside down chair. And Isora, 9 years old, thought maybe it was the walking square.
Walking square, nice. So the official name of this constellation is not upside down half a flying horse. The official name is Pegasus. I think I would have gone personally with some sort of like sea creature, an octopus or a jellyfish, something with tentacles. But this is in fact the winged horse Pegasus, or his front half anyway. And again, the easiest part of Pegasus to find is the square. This is a great constellation to look for in the autumn because as autumn continues on, Pegasus is going to be splashed across the early evening sky pretty much all season long. And it's a nice big constellation. It takes up a good chunk of sky. The easiest part of it to find is the square. So you've got weeks and weeks to go hunting for Pegasus in the sky. It's my anchor constellation for autumn. It's the one I use to really remind myself, oh, the autumn sky is up. It's also one of the rare constellations that shares a star with another constellation. So coming off of this back corner of the square, this star is actually also part of another constellation coming off in this direction over here. Again, it's very rare that constellations share stars. I have always wondered why they didn't just make this the back legs of the horse. It seems like that would have made a lot of sense. But they didn't. So this group of stars back here is its own separate constellation. What would you call it? You were going to name this group of stars right here. What would you call that group of stars? Not sure what I'd go with here.
I think we're giving our viewers a chance to get their answers in. Now they're starting to come in. So Poppy thinks it looks like a line. Marcy votes for a tail. Isora says a stick. We have a satellite and the squeezy.
The squeezy. Oh my goodness, I love that. So nobody sees a princess is what you're saying. Okay, that's okay. Because this looks nothing like a princess, but that is exactly what it is meant to be. This is Andromeda. This is Cassiopeia and Cepheus's daughter, Andromeda, the one who was getting sacrificed to the sea monster because the sea god was upset with her mother. And she is often depicted in chains because she was chained to a rock to be eaten by the sea monster. Again, remember, she doesn't get eaten. The story ends quite happily for her. But you can also see that her father, her mother, and she are in a line sort of in the sky. They're actually very close to each other in the sky. The whole family is very close to each other. Andromeda itself or herself can be a little tricky to spot if you don't know quite where to look, but it helps that one end of the constellation is anchored by the square. The square is, again, relatively easy to pick out in the sky. Just look where the back end of the horse is supposed to be. And you will be looking at the constellation Andromeda. Now, there is one more member of this odd little tail who can be found in this patch of sky. Again, we're looking at sort of the east and northeast sky. And that is the hero himself, Perseus, who defeated the sea monster by showing it the head of the Gorgon Medusa and turning it to stone. And he is actually sort of between and below Cassiopeia and Andromeda. So here's Cassiopeia, here's Andromeda. This group of stars right here makes up the constellation Perseus. Now this is another one that doesn't look anything like what it is supposed to be. So it's very hard to look at that and see a hero holding a head, a man holding a severed head, which is exactly what this is supposed to be. But what's, if I put the art up there, what's kind of interesting about it is if you look at these two stars off to the side, they are marked, they're where the eyes of Medusa are supposed to be. So the easiest part of Perseus to find generally is this curve of stars right here, just below Cassiopeia. That's a good thing to look for. And then this star over here that is the brighter of the two stars that marks Medusa's eyes is actually a very interesting star. There's a reason why it got identified as the eye of the Gorgon, the eye that can turn you to stone. That star's name is Algol, which means demon. This is the demon star. And it's named that actually because it's what we call a variable star. It's a star that changes brightness. There are a lot of stars out there that do that. You know, we like to think of the stars as being very constant, but a lot of them actually change their brightness, and for different reasons, but in predictable ways. Algol is one of them. And but its changeability in ancient times earned it the name demon star and got it identified with the eye of Medusa that will turn you to stone. So the entire drama is playing out in the sort of east and northeastern sky. They kind of make a big V in the sky, the characters in this particular story. Autumn is a great time to go out and look for these characters from this story. Early winter also works, but autumn is definitely the best time to go look for them. They're all close together in the sky, playing out repeats of their story throughout time. Now you probably noticed there is a very absurdly bright object over here in the east. There are two more absurdly bright objects over there in the south. I really haven't spoken about them yet because they're not stars, they are planets. So we have 3 planets that will be visible in the sky for the next couple of weeks. 2 sort of in the southwest and 1 rising in the east around the same time. And the one rising in the east, the one that has this noticeably reddish color to it, is not surprisingly the red planet, the planet Mars. So it's going to be, this is a great time to go out and look at Mars over the next week or so, the next 2 weeks, because it's at a point that we call opposition. So when Mars is at opposition, that means that it is as close to Earth as their orbits are going to let them get, which means it's as bright as it's going to get. So this is when Mars is going to be at its brightest. It's also when its color is going to be most noticeable. It is going to have a reddish tint to it. It's not going to be blood red or anything like that, but it is going to have a reddish color to it. So look in the east for a bright object with a reddish color. And it is actually right under the square of Pegasus right now. And you'll have found the planet Mars. So over to the south, Mars, of course, is a rocky planet. It's kind of close to Earth. The 2 that we have over in the south here are the other kind of planet. These are gas giants. These are, in fact, the planets Jupiter and Saturn. Jupiter is going to be very easy to pick out. It's going to be the brightest thing in the sky that is not the moon. And the moon is not going to be up in the night sky today. It's actually going to be a new moon in just about 1 hour, which means it's up at the same time as the sun for now. Of course, the moon is always moving in its orbit around the Earth. So Jupiter is going to be a very, very bright object. Even though it's 500 million miles away from us, it's really, really big, and it's covered with highly reflective clouds, which means it sticks out nice and bright. Saturn is right next to it, and it blends into the sky a little bit better. It's still brighter than the stars around it, but not as absurdly, stupidly bright as Jupiter is. It's not as big as Jupiter. It's almost twice as far away from us as Jupiter, but it is helped by the fact that it has a ring system going around it that is very reflective, mostly made out of ice. Now, Saturn is one of my favorite planets. It is a fascinating world. And one of my favorite space missions spent 13 years in orbit around Saturn, and that was the Cassini spacecraft. From 2004 to 2017, it studied Saturn and its rings and its moons up close, and it learned all sorts of fascinating things. It also discovered a few interesting things, and I'm going to share one of them. It's an audio file. So I hope this comes through. Listen to the sounds of Saturn. It sounds particularly appropriate for this time of year because it sounds like Halloween. Here we go. Are you creeped out yet? So that is an actual recording of radio emissions from Saturn by the Cassini spacecraft. Saturn actually emits radio waves, especially from its poles where it has aurora, just like Earth does. And the activities that cause that aurora also cause radio emissions, which Cassini was able to record. Now, that recording you just heard was very compressed. They compressed something like half an hour's worth of data into about a minute. But I always love playing that around Halloween because it's surprising to me how perfectly Halloweenish Saturn sounds when you take the time to listen. So I'm running out of time. Christina, are there any questions I should try to answer?
I was just going to second that it did sound very spooky, Talia. And we've got a couple of comments just about that audio you just shared with the group. Sylvie H10 thought it sounded like aliens, and Nico H3 thought that's scary. So hopefully we didn't scare our little ones too much.
It sounds kind of creepy, but don't worry. Saturn is a billion miles away. So it's nothing, it's not being caused by anything that's actually creepy, and it's happening really far away. So fortunately, we don't have to be worried about it.
And other than those comments, we don't have any additional questions at the moment. So I'm going to get us wrapped up here. And I would like to thank you, Talia, and everyone can say thank you and goodbye.
Bye, everybody.
And thank you to our audience today for joining for the program. We hope you enjoyed it. And what I will say is if you would like to join us for more programs like this or other programs from the Museum of Science, you can check out all of our offerings by going to our website at www.mos.org/mosathome. Also, if you'd like to try out the software that we use for today's show, you can do that by visiting www.solarium.org. It is a free program to use. And lastly, if you would like to continue to support programming here at the museum, you can find out about how you can do that by visiting our website at engage.mos.org/welcome. Well, with all that being said, we hope you have a wonderful afternoon, a good weekend, and we will catch you at the next one.